Hi, everyone, and welcome to the YouTube version of this Conservation Optimism webinar. There's a slightly different YouTube version because the recording for the original public webinar didn't work at the beginning, so we're re-recording the first few slides, and then you'll notice a switch as we switch across to the recording of the public webinar. You're very welcome. If you weren't able to join us on the day, I'm delighted that you've been able to join us on YouTube afterwards. Your presenters for today are Reshu Bashyal, who is a fantastic award-winning conservationist. She won one of the Whitley Awards last year for her brilliant work on conserving the traditional and medicinal plants of her native Nepal, particular focus on taxa species, that's yew trees, and on orchids. And Rashu is renowned as a wonderful conservationist. I'm John. I'm the Director of Conservation Optimism based here at the University of Oxford. I'm a wildlife conservationist all my life, which dates back to the Stone Age, so I've been around a lot. Um, Conservation Optimism was put together in 2016 as a response to this. This particular wording came from an email from a friend and colleague in Canada about 12 months ago. Some of the most common challenges we face are conservation burnout, our psychological safety, ecological grief, amongst both early career and well-established conservationists. We live in a context of crisis and emergency. I have a whole set of slides that set out the challenges that we're facing in this decade, the environmental challenges, because if we're going to talk seriously about optimism, that has to be based on solid foundations, and you can't have that without really taking a good look at the challenge first. I don't have time for all those slides today, so we'll just sum it up with that. But we live in a context of crisis and emergency, and working in that context is overwhelming for a lot of people. Anxiety and despair are not at all unreasonable responses. And so conservation optimism was set up not just because we care about conservationists and their mental health, although on both counts we do very much, but also because of this. This is a brilliant quote. I wish I'd said it, but Christiana Figueres got this one. A sense of despair is understandable, but it robs us of our agency. It makes us vulnerable and it prevents the radical collaboration. I love that bit. We need. Doubt holds us back. So this is not just about supporting conservationists. If we have no hope, if we're feeling hopeless, it will at least hold us back, if not make us give up. With hope, we can work wonders. So conservation optimism is about supporting, but also empowering and enabling conservationists all over the world. We share hope and we build capacity and community, working with an awful lot of other wonderful people around the world. One of the things our day-to-day job is sharing stories of hope. Our social media channels are really busy. Our blogs are really busy, sometimes with stories of conservation success, but also with interviews and conversations with amazing conservationists around the world. They can be conservation superstars, but also early career conservationists who are doing brilliant things. The world of conservation is not short of brilliant people to talk to. We do a film festival every year, which has been such a big success when it was started a few years ago. We've kept it going. Last year's one was a triumph. I can say that because I wasn't involved with it. It was other people who set it up, and it was brilliant. And we've got a video of it on YouTube. So if you want to use that, you're very welcome. Come and talk to us, and maybe we can have a remote showing of the film festival. We do podcasts, and we're about to launch some new ones, which is exciting. We produce tools for conservation optimists. The library is not huge, but what's in it is good. The positive communication toolkit is a useful thing, and so are some of these other things. They're on the website. Please go and plunder at will, and we hope you find these things useful. If there are other things you might find useful, come and talk to us. We'll try and see if we can get them prepared. We do summits, and we did two summits in 2017 and 2019, and then as you'll have seen, there was a large pandemic. But we did another one in 2024, and it took a lot of work to set it up, but it was absolutely worth it because it was brilliant. We had 300 people coming either physically to Oxford or online, and we had presenters from the world of business and artists and NGOs and scientists and many, many other people. And we had 3 days of brilliance, and it was absolutely wonderful. Various bits of it are online. So go and look it up. We have this wonderful network of organizations around the world who share our ethos and our idea that we need to share hope in order to look after each other and to keep ourselves empowered and enabled. I think there's about 208, 209 now. And one of the things this wonderful network does is put on these webinars where we share skills and we share lessons learned. And in the 2 years that I've been with Conservation Optimism, we've had 11 or 12 webinars, and every one of them has been brilliant. So the bar is set very high. But we thought we would try and do our own one today and share the lessons that we have learned through our work. And given the standard that's gone before us, we need to make it good if it's going to live up to its predecessors. These are all online. Do go and look. They are absolutely fantastic and really, really helpful. I hope ours will also be. The wherefore, for what purpose? For a conservation strategist like me, this is my favorite word. Why are we doing this? And so much of our conservation work these days is about getting humans to do or feel differently. It is about shifting human attitudes and human behavior. That could be us trying to get people engaged in conservation to feel better and therefore to feel more hopeful and therefore to feel more enabled and have more agency and be more effective in their work. It might be somebody working with farming communities, trying to work with them to get them to use more sustainable farming methods or to live in better coexistence with the biodiversity that is around them. If you're in the more industrialized parts of the world like this one, it may be persuading people to leave their 4x4 at home and get on their bicycle. But in so many ways, the conservation work we do is about getting people to feel differently and to act. It may be reaching into their pocket and finding some money to support some conservation work. So much of our work is around changing human behavior rather than about studying animals, which is a shame because most of us get into this because we really like the animals in the first place, but never mind. What we used to think about is communication being about conservation. We would do some conservation, often, if you're in this country, often somewhere else in the world, and then go and communicate about it, either to raise awareness or to raise funds or both or for whatever purpose. But that changes now because so much of what we need to do is about changing human behavior. This is communication for conservation, where communication becomes the main conservation tool. And so many of these brilliant webinars we've had over the last 2 years of people communicating in one way or another to make people feel differently and act differently about some element of the natural world. What have we learned? I shall try and share some of these lessons. The first one I'm stealing from the Delphic Oracle here for those who know their Greek history. But know thyself is so important. I have sat down with so many organizations and they say, can you come and help us think about how we communicate what we're doing? I'm very happy to do so. And the first question, of course, is, right, what are you doing? What's your project about? And maybe half an hour or an hour later, we're still sitting there trying to articulate what this particular piece of work is really about. Example, when I joined Save the Rhino International a few years ago, which is a brilliant organization, we sat down with the team and we went round and asked each other, why do we save rhinos? Why do we save rhinos? And we got as many really good answers as there were people around the table. And we all worked as a team to come up with a form of words that we were all happy with. And we could go out and say, this is who we are. This is why we're doing what we do. This is how we do it. And that having that piece of self-articulation is an incredibly powerful tool in itself. There is nothing that prevents us from communicating clearly more readily than not really knowing what it is that we want to say. So know thyself is incredibly important. And having done that, know thy audience And this should really say audiences because they tend to be plural. Um, there is a whole series of work about identifying your stakeholders, prioritizing your stakeholders. Rashu will say more about it later. That is incredibly important. What I want to talk about is having worked out who your different audiences are, and that in itself is a big piece of work. We then need to understand those audiences, where they are now, and where we'd like them to be, and how we can move them from one place to another. And at this point, there are two things to say. One is there are many different lenses about understanding an audience. I will mention a couple of them, but there are others. Pick your lens, pick the one that works for you in trying to understand your different audiences, your different stakeholder groups, and how, where you need them to be, how you might move them on that journey. If my lenses don't work for you, pick your own. The other thing to say is that there is a shortcut here. I'll come in with that afterwards. But if understanding a bit of human psychology is not your thing, there is a cheat here, which we can come to later. That's my audience. Anybody who gets an email from me will know how much I love emojis, and that's one of my favorite ones. I usually ask the audience, what are these people doing? And somebody yells back, screaming. But seeing as I can't see any of you, and you could all be watching Bad Bunny's halftime Super Bowl show, as far as I know. I won't do that this time. But this is the scream emoji, and these people are supposed to be screaming. It's a really good emoji. I use it a lot. Based on the painting, of course, by Edvard Munch, the Norwegian painter. This was painted at the end of the 19th century. If you look at this emoji, I'll flick back. The person has his hands up by his cheeks or her cheeks and is yelling, yeah, they're screaming. Let this person in. If you look at the painting, person's hands are up behind their ears. And Edvard Munch and some of his friends went for a walk above Oslo one night, and suddenly the whole sky was on fire, and it seemed like nature was screaming. And the person in the painting, on whom all the scream emojis and all the scream masks are based, isn't screaming. They're holding their hands over their ears. They're blocking out a scream. I know this because, as well as being an experienced conservationist, I'm also an expert in art history. No, I know this because I Googled it. My point here being audience research and finding out about your audiences and who you're dealing with is not difficult. Even I can do it with Google. Unless you don't do it, unless you make assumptions, in which case it becomes very hard indeed, and we often get surprised. So do find out about your audience. Boom. This is one way of looking at an audience. This is a bit of 21st century social science. This is Shalom Schwartz's work on universal human values. We could spend a whole hour on this. It is brilliant. This is not what kind of person am I? Where do I fit into this? These are the values that we all have. And I mean, it's probably not 100% accurate, but it's been tested in many different places around the world in different cultures. And it generally, as a model, seems to hold. And these values relate to each other in different ways. Neighboring values can reinforce each other. Opposing values, very difficult to have opposing values on the same issue at the same time. This chart has been laid out like this for a reason. These break down in different ways, and understanding where your audience is in terms of their values, their predominant values at the moment in this context, and whether you can talk to those values or whether you really need to try and take them on a journey, is one really good way of understanding an audience. And if anybody is interested in this and wants to have a chat about it sometime, you'll have to stop me after a couple of hours because I could talk for ages on this one. It's a really interesting way of understanding audiences through their values and the attitudes that sit on top of those values. Here's another one, which is a brilliant piece of work, for which the author won a Nobel Prize. This is Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. But this is just a way of understanding how humans think. Mark Soames wrote a brilliant book a decade earlier in which he commented that anybody who thinks that our conscious mind sits on top of the unconscious is kidding themselves. The conscious is actually a small observation platform out to one side. Most of what goes on in our heads is unconscious, and it's fast and associative and has an awful lot of biases and mental shortcuts, heuristics that it uses in order to do that incredibly fast, incredibly brilliant work that it does. And most of his book, if you've read it, and if you haven't, I recommend it, is about understanding the biases and heuristics that our unconscious mind uses. Most of our scientific method is designed to circumvent those biases even before we had names for them. The other bit is the 5% where our conscious self cuts in and goes, hang on a minute. And it's slow and it's logical and it tries to go into automatic mode as quickly as possible because it takes a lot of effort. When you're communicating with an audience, just think, which bit do you want to talk to? Because as scientists, how many of us get figures and graphs out and try to talk to the 5% and not the 95%? Plan the journey. What are you going to do with your audience? In my case, you're going to keep an eye on the clock and talk fast. Looking at values here, if we're looking at climate crisis, climate emergency, that puts people into a state of threat, into a state of wanting security. And they're down here in this red circle at the bottom, in where the values are about keeping myself and my family safe in this world of changing climate and storms coming in and all kinds of stuff going on. Because it's a long journey, you could talk to those values, but in doing so, you'd also be reinforcing them. We need to take people on a journey up towards where a belief in the possibility of self-direction and a better world, unity with nature, and protecting the environment is possible. So it's taking people on a values journey out of one place of threat and security into another place of the hope of ending up somewhere that we actually want to be. We think, therefore we are. For those of us who are fond of the Latin, that's Descartes, philosopher. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. But actually, we feel, therefore we are. We are feeling creatures. The thinking is just a route to the feeling. Human beings will do what makes them feel good, and they will try to avoid what makes them feel bad. And that's boiling human beings down to a nutshell, but it's pretty much true in almost every circumstance. We are feeling creatures, not thinking creatures. Think about that the next time you wave a graph in front of somebody. One of the most powerful tools for communicating with people, which links back to some of these models, is storytelling. And it's become very popular in the last 10 years. And there are storytelling workshops all over the place. And that's great. There is a fundamental underlying reason for this. This is how our brains work. We live in what we don't like to think, but probably is a fairly chaotic, fairly random world. But we like to order it. We tell ourselves stories. We look for patterns all the time. And whether it's the gods on Mount Olympus, or there's a big noise in the sky because the thunderbird is clapping its wings, or whatever, we tell ourselves stories. There's a quote from somewhere, which might be me, that said we learn the world in narratives and then we go to sleep and dream stories. Other people, Yuval Harari, who wrote Sapiens and many other books on AI more recently, Homo sapiens is a storytelling animal that thinks in stories rather than numbers or graphs. The most powerful person in the world is a storyteller, sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation. That's Steve Jobs. Mary Catherine Bateman, American anthropologist. The human species thinks in metaphors, learns through stories. It is the way our brains work. It's not a good way of communicating. It is the good way of communicating. Learn to tell stories. Do not open your writing for a public audience with either a conclusion or a bunch of evidence that's leading up to a conclusion. You can do that later. Open by telling them a story, and then you've got them. And framing. Framing is everything. A positive framing, Kahneman's brilliant example is the medical procedure you're about to have has a 10%, has a 90% survival rate versus the other medical procedure has a 10% mortality rate. They actually have a very different impact on the human brain. That the positive sounding one, and we are an organization who does positive communication all the time. Positive communication will tickle the amygdala. It'll get some dopamine and serotonin out of there. It produces a physiological response in the brain. Frame exactly the same thing the other way, and you'll get adrenaline and cortisol and fight or flight responses. There are measurable physiological responses in the human brain just by the way you frame your communications. When we frame communications like this was from when the 1.5 degrees report came out in 2018. Big headlines, code red for humanity. There is really good reason for using this language. We grew up in small communities. We grew up in evolutionary terms in small communities. If there's a tiger wanders into the village or the river is flooding, you want to run into your village and you want to be yelling and screaming, and there's a tiger, there's an emergency, a crisis. And that produces a response in people. It produces adrenaline and cortisol, and people leap into action, and boy, can people move fast when there's an emergency. But we have only been dealing with global crises for a very short time. In my working experience, we have gone from local threats where somebody's polluting the river to regional threats where there's acid rain drifting from one country to another, to global threats, holes in the ozone layer, and much more recently, climate change and biodiversity, global biodiversity crisis. We don't know how to deal with these things. So if we keep yelling crisis, emergency, we are eliciting a fight or flight response in people who have no way of fighting this thing. They do not know how to fight a global crisis, and they have nowhere to flee to because it's a global crisis. So unless you're an astronaut, you're in trouble. So they do the third thing, which is freeze. People think there's nothing I can do, so they don't do anything. We understand why we use this language, and we really do need to initiate action, but we need to think before we use it because we're using it in inappropriate context. One I keep going on about is people and nature thrive. Lots of people use it. WWF used to use it. IPBES use it. It sounds lovely. We're living in harmony with nature. Isn't that great? We're all going to have a nice future in harmony with nature. It frames people and nature as two different things that we should live in harmony with. And that's fine if times are good. People will go with it. But if times are hard, people will see that as a choice. And if they're thinking me and mine and now, they're not going to think, oh, I'll look after nature. I'm going to look after people, thank you very much, because that's what's important to me. This should be about people thriving. A thriving economy is important to me because I need to feed my kids. A healthy world is important to me because I want my kids to be able to breathe clean air and have a resilient world to live in 20 years' time. By talking about how nature is important to people, we bring it all into the same currency, and people can make comparisons between this priority and that priority, but we're talking the same language. People and nature thrive is two different things. And as I say, when times are hard, people will see it as a choice and they won't choose the one we would want them to. Measuring impact is something that Rash is going to talk about more than I am. I want to talk about the theory of it, which is it's incredibly important to do it. And I still bump into so many people who do it because other people have asked them to, particularly financial donors. Measuring impact is incredibly important because it allows us to do adaptive management. If we know how our work is being effective or not, then we can change what we're doing. And we're not locked into a 3-year log frame where we do what we do, and then we measure right at the end and we found out this bit works and that bit didn't, and we've got to do another project to do more of the bit that worked and less of the bit that didn't. If we're measuring as we go along, we can adapt as we go along and we can be much more impactful. So measuring impact, hugely important. But if we're talking about human behavior change, we're talking about measuring the impact of what goes on in somebody's mind. And it's not impossible. Did you see our report? Yes, I did. Did it mean anything to you? Yes, I really thought it was quite important and it made an impact on me. That's useful information. But did you change your mind in the end? Yes, that's useful information too. How much did our report influence you changing your mind? I don't know. I heard the news and I heard the politicians talking about it and I read your report, and in the end I changed my mind. It's very, very difficult to do. But there are limits. It's a bit like the uncertainty principle. The more you try and stare at it, the more difficult it is to measure. We have to recognize that there are things we can do with measuring impact, but at the same time, when we're talking about human behavior, there are limits. And often managers and fundraisers really want discrete attribution. How much did we, our organization, contribute to changing those people's minds? No idea. Impossible to measure. There are limits. We need to get skills. Being a scientist or a conservationist who studied science and at some point learned to talk does not make us necessarily skilled communicators. There is a whole world of communication skills out there that we can learn from. We need to bring in our communication colleagues. We need to work very closely with them. We need to learn from them, and we need to lean heavily on their skills and their learning in order to get this across. There is a need for humility in this case. I also said there was a shortcut when it came to the whole human psychology thing, because there is a sector that has been operating for well over 100 years, centuries in some parts of the world, which tries to get people to change their behavior. There is no difference between get off your bicycle or get out of your 4x4, get on your bicycle, and buy our cornflakes, don't buy their cornflakes. The propaganda / advertising / marketing is what we normally call it these days, industry, they tend to measure people differently. They tend to talk about demographic groups and economic groups, but they're doing exactly the same work. A conservation human behavior change project is almost exactly the same as an advertising campaign. And again, as well as our comms colleagues, we can learn from our marketing colleagues. We do not need to make the mistake of thinking that because it's new to us, that it's new. It really isn't. And we can learn from a lot of people. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Yes, pictures of advertising from all over the world from a long time ago. The one down the bottom is Hyderabad, which makes Times Square look like nothing by comparison. It's just amazing. There are apparently Chinese adverts available from many centuries before the Christian era. So we've known about this stuff for a long time. At which point I can hand over to my excellent colleague, and thank you for listening to me. Reshu, over to you.
Thanks, Jon. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to see so many audience, so many participants, and I can see some of the familiar faces. Also, it is so nice to see some participants from Nepal joining because I'm currently based in Nepal. Although this slide is about, I took these emojis from Jon's slide, the scream emoji. But I want to start with a happy moment. Let's think of a moment. It can be your moment when you had a really nice conversation about a conservation message that you wanted to deliver, and you felt really great about the way you communicated. And in that particular moment, you wanted to pat yourself. I'm sure there are some moments which you have been to that situation in your life. I have been too, and but let's also be honest that there are so many moments when we, when with the idea of having to communicate things, having to expose ourselves to audience makes us very nervous, skeptical, and even before, thinking about different strategies, different tips, tricks, frameworks, we get so anxious that we cannot even speak a single word. I have been to that boat many times, and I have seen other people sailing along with me in that boat together. Whenever we have to communicate about our conservation work, why is there so much fear of communicating things? Because in most of the situation we are asked to talk about what we do, about ourselves, about the research findings that we have proudly done and we want to share. But even with that situation, we get so anxious, and this kind of resistance is stopping us to have impactful conversations. Next slide. There are also a lot of debates on how we communicate versus what we communicate. And there are, if we look into, like Google, or if we nowadays, if we use some AI tools to find out different strategies about conversation, we can find so many tools that talk about whether how you communicate is important than what we communicate. Um, from my perspective, it is equally important to communicate. It is equally important to find what we want to communicate, and uh, if we can master how we communicate, then it is even better. There is no right or wrong in this both debate. Both of them are really important. It just depends on situation and rest of the other things. But along with these two, there is also one other important thing that is even more important. I hope you didn't see that slide. If, if you can guess what is that important thing in order to communicate, it would be really nice to see some of your points in the chat box. I will wait for some time. I think Jon also mentioned in his presentation somewhere. All right, I think we can just move. Along with identifying, okay, I can see one response. Identifying when to communicate. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for that. So along with identifying what to communicate, how to communicate, it is also very important to know our audience, know who are our audience, what values they bring, um, what are their roles compared to a particular setting, and what are the needs, what do they really want to know, want to hear from us. We have to really be on the shoe of our listeners and think from their perspective. Along with that, in order to have a good and strategic conversation, it is also important to have a common goal, common understanding, because if we can identify our common shared values, shared goal, then the conversation becomes a real conversation rather than sharing bits of information. So it is very important. And yes, next slide. But I also want to share something about that photo, about the happy faces. Um, this photo is from one of my project sites where we are forming a local community task force where these women, incredible women, are engaging in anti-poaching patrols. And this happy face, I wanted to put this happy face because this was during one of our trainings on field. Next slide. So to sum up, communicating, in order to have a great conversation, strategic communication, we need to have a message. If it is backed by evidence, then even better. But also we need to show value to our audience in order to achieve the goal of our conversation. Next slide. Um, I kept this illustration from my storybook on yew tree. As you can see, a yew tree in the illustration, a tree um, with some red dots in it. They are red arils for the tree. If you have seen yew trees, then you might have seen these kind of things already. But even if you are not aware about a yew tree, so this is a tree whose leaves are used to prepare taxol, which is used to treat cancer. And this is vulnerable in global IUCN Red List. So if you see this illustration, you can see clearly different type of audience. Um, if you can name some of them in the chat box, um, it would be nice. It looks like I'm troubling troubling participants, but you can actually see some of the some kids and yes, oh, lots of responses. Thank you. Workers, farmers, women, elders, from young to old and different professions, photographers, researchers, woodcutters. Great, yes. There are different type of stakeholders, different type of audience in the photo, in the illustration, and this is actually in our practical world we find like we find people with different opinions, different values, like with different interest. So how do we communicate with these kind of different stakeholders while understanding everyone has an important role to play, and also like not neglecting anyone from the group. That is really important. Yes, next slide, John. And in some setting, so imagine a setting where you are organizing a group interaction, and like you made it very clear that you wanted certain particular group of stakeholders. For example, if I'm organizing a workshop for you harvesters, I have made it very, I have made all the preparation to ensure that the participant of the workshop are all related to you harvest. um, Even with that kind of preparation, there will be audience who have different power, different capacity to influence. Even with that, some of the participants will be those who represent nursery owners. Some of them are only harvesters, professional harvesters. Some of them will be opportunistic harvesters. Some of them will be growing nurseries, harvesting, but also acting as local intermediaries or local traders in the setting. So there will be all kind of people in that group within the umbrella of harvesters. And it is so relevant for real practical experience. And there will also be some people with, like whose role overlap in terms of uh, fulfilling that particular thing. Next slide. So I quite like to use this stakeholders analysis matrix. I I'm sure some of you have already some of you are already aware about this matrix, um, and some of you have already used this matrix. Some of you know about it, but you have not used. But some of you may have already used this in terms of in some of your project management or in some of your stakeholders analysis work before. I actually learned about this matrix from conservation trainings organized by brilliant people from Conservation Leadership Program and from ACE Fellowship. It was really nice to understand, like learn about this matrix and understand how to work with different type of stakeholders, considering the project we have on our mind. So as you can see, this matrix, it is so easy to understand that there are two axes. Axis one includes talks about influence, influence or power, and axis two is about involvement or engagement of considering a particular stakeholder. And if we divide this into four different quadrants, we can find some stakeholders who have low influence but very high involvement, as in quadrant two. Some of them have high influence and high involvement, as in quadrant 3, Q3, and some of them have very low influence, low involvement, and some of the stakeholders can have very high influence. This is very relevant for like a head of forest department, but they have a very low involvement, especially considering the ground level implementation. And this one example of low influence and high involvement could be a professional harvester who has very high involvement in terms of harvesting use, but they have very less like impact or influence in terms of how harvest trade can be managed, how that trade can be managed. So once we like divide our stakeholders in different metrics, in different quadrants, it is really easy to understand who are our target audience, considering that particular situation, and where to prioritize with our time and with our limited funding in terms of interventions. Next slide, please. And this helps us to also understand these things. For the stakeholders with low influence, high involvement, they need to be kept informed. And the stakeholders with high influence, high involvement, they are very important, and they need to be managed very closely. And there are also some stakeholders with very low influence, low involvement. They should not be neglected in any way, so they need to be monitored. And there are these high influential people with very low involvement, and these are the busiest people, but it is always nice to keep them satisfied, or keep them like informed, at least in terms of some of the information that they need to know. Next slide. All right, so Jon already mentioned about measuring impact, some bit of it. It is so important to, I want to repeat what Jon just said. It is so important to measure impact, not just to, like submit a report, or to our funders, or to, like, so that we are this great, that great in terms of what we do. But it is really important to help us understand whether any of our work, any of our actions are making positive change, or whether they are going in right direction, or we need to have some, like adjustment, or we need to make some correction in terms of achieving our proposed result. So it is very important to measure impact. Next slide. But again, as Jon said, measuring impact is not as easy as, like, especially when we want to measure impact of our intervention on people's knowledge, people's behavior, attitude. It is really difficult. It is not as easy as measuring tree girth. I kept this big tree. It is a yew tree, and this is me along with our local resource person measuring that big yew tree. Next slide, please. In conservation optimism, we normally have a small survey to ask feedback about our webinars. And this is an example of, like, although it doesn't help us to, like come to a particular quantified information, but it at least helps us to understand whether our direction is right or wrong, and what needs to be improved. So these kind of tools that are used to measure impact are really important. If they are used considering our context situation, they can have really nice result. So this was from our webinar we organized in May last year from Biophilic Conversations, from a brilliant team of Biophilic Conversations. And you will also get the similar kind of webinar feedback form later. Next slide. And this is another example of actually from our field work. So from our field work, where we wanted to understand how well local communities, local harvesters uptake our species identification training related to taxes, related to U-tree. And we used a psychological match mismatch experiment in order to assess the identification capacity of harvesters. So we assessed their identification capacity before the training, and we kept a gap of 3 months, 4 months, depending on the situation. And then we again assess the identification capacity with the same question, same tools. For example, here we used photos to the same group of audience after 3 months. And this helped us to at least understand whether our intervention of, like a training related to identification of taxes was helpful or not for the people over there. Next slide. And we also often use pre-post awareness programs, surveys. Like it doesn't, as we said, it doesn't help us to come to a conclusion about whether our workshop or short-term workshop help to, like change behavior, because in order to measure behavior, we have to like consider all time period. And actually like look from different direction, but it at least helps us to understand whether we could help like our participants, at least let them know about what was like required for them to understand. So no matter what strategy, what kind of tools and tricks we use, strong communication backs with three key things. One is there has to be important information. What backed by evidence is even better. Number two, understanding our audience. It is really important to understand who are our audience, what are their values, what common values we share, and what choice we make to communicate to our audience. So if we can, like get these things right, it will be really a like great conversation. It will not just be clear, not just be, like a fun-filled kind of two-way conversational, but it will also be a meaningful and impactful conversation. Yes, thank you. Over to you, John.
Brilliant, thanks. I'm going to give you 2 minutes of optimism, because that's our stock in trade, and then that should leave us a couple of minutes at least to see if we can get a couple of thoughts from the audience, if anybody's got any burning comments. Barack Obama used to say that if you could pick any time in human history to be born and you didn't know into which circumstances you'd be born, you'd pick now. You've got more chance of surviving, more chance of not living in absolute poverty than ever before. Now is a great time to be alive, and we've got to think about how that happened. Bear in mind, we live in a world where we've probably just missed our 1.5 climate change target. And well, in this country, we're supposed to be aiming for 30 by 30, and we're currently at 3% for 30 by 2030. So the challenges are great, but this is the world population graph, and showing the proportion living in extreme poverty. So obviously the population rockets, the human population rockets after 1950. But note the dark red area down the bottom is the number of people living in absolute poverty. Not only has the proportion dropped as the human population has increased dramatically, the number of people living in absolute poverty has dropped, even though the population has rocketed up to 8.2 billion. How did we do that? Because that's a pretty incredible thing. This is life expectancy around the world. And yes, there are differences between different areas of the world, and they need to be spoken about. But the direction of travel in every case is significantly up. We have almost doubled human life expectancy in the last 100 years. That's an incredible achievement. This is global child mortality. And stubbornly, this graph would be the same if we went back centuries. Just over 40% of human children die before their fifth birthday. Not anymore. Now it's 4%, even with a world of rocketing human population. How on earth did we do that? I think the answer is that we did those things because we can get this stuff done. And these are fundamental human things. They are the life of a child. They are looking at people who maybe you don't recognize their lifestyle or how they live, but you can see those people are living in absolute poverty and they shouldn't have to live like that. Empathy is possible. And we have achieved wonderful things. We did not achieve them by a bunch of important people sitting around a table and making some decisions. We did them over time by somebody in one country doing something brilliant, like Rashu's doing with her medicinal plants, and somebody in another country does something else brilliant. And decade by decade by decade, we achieve these amazing things. I do not think that looking after the place we live is any kind of big jump from looking after our kids and looking after people who are living in terrible poverty. So I think we're going to get there. I do not think we have to change the world. I think we're waiting for everybody else to catch up. And over a couple of generations, maybe 3 or 4, maybe 100 years, everybody will catch up. They'll look back on us and roll their eyes and say, how could they live like that? They were so unsustainable. So I think we're going to get there, which is great for us because we don't have to turn the tide. We just have to keep stuff safe until everybody else can catch up with us. But it's going to take time. So we need to keep stuff safe for several decades until everybody else catches up. But we'll get there. The challenge is great, but it is achievable. We need large-scale behavior change. Conservation is primarily a social science. I know everybody hates me saying that, but it probably is. But that means we all have an opportunity to make a great difference. If you want to come and work with us, we'd love to work with you. But there are real reasons for optimism, and we will get there. I'm going to stop sharing and see if anybody's got their camera switched on, which indeed they haven't. But it's nice to see you on your names anyway. We've got a couple of minutes. Have we got time for a couple of comments from the audience? Does anybody want to say anything? It'd be lovely to hear from anybody. Usual reaction on a webinar.
Thank you. This has been very inspiring. I came like looking on how to communicate like internally the work that we do. So I work in agriculture in a conservation organization, and the idea is for our colleagues not to look at it only for livelihoods, but really what we get a lot is agriculture as a driver of deforestation and not as an opportunity for people to get engaged and change their behavior. So this has really sparked a lot of insights and food for thought. So thank you very much.
Gina, if you'd like to have a chat sometime, we'd be very happy to have a one-to-one and just be a sounding board, help think things through if that will help. Anybody else got any thoughts? You don't have to, but I know webinars are not the easiest place to chirp up, but there's some nice comments in the written comments, which is very nice. Thank you, guys. It's lovely to see you all. It's 59, so we can end 30 seconds early. It's lovely to see you all. We'll get.
I just want to say sorry. I also kept the webinar survey form just in.
It's in the chat. Thanks, Rashu. Webinar survey form is in the chat. Please make Rashu happy and fill it in. You've made both of us really happy by turning up. And if you're watching this afterwards, thank you for watching it afterwards. Lovely to see you all. Thank you very much for coming. Bye-bye for now.
Yes, thank you so much.